But thanks for accepting to speak to us this morning. Before we get to the facts about what you did or didn't do, knew or did not know, what's your response to the Republic story on your conduct with the Janneh Commission?
Thank you very much, Peter. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can. You're very, very clear indeed.
Having
yes.
me on this show today. As you would have noticed, this is the first time that I am coming out of my shell since I left public office 5 years ago in 2020. But it is the circumstances presently in the country that has compelled me to come out and to clarify. I see that Gambia is like the mob in ancient Rome these days. One day you are a hero and the next day you are a villain. But more seriously, Peter, I can see the clamor and all the noise about the Janneh assets after the report in the Republic. There is actually so much noise that I'm sure even those close to me are beginning to have doubts. But I can assure them that their trust and confidence in me is not misplaced, and that by the end of this program today, they will have been reassured. Now, the insults and abuses aside, because we should be able to express ourselves with respect and decorum in a democracy. I have always fought for that in that country. But I also fully accept that the people have a right to demand the truth about the Janneh assets. And I understand their frustration over the lack of total transparency in the matter. So on my part, let me be clear. I want to encourage the government of the Gambia to share all the information with the public about the assets to allay their concerns. I did so with members of the National Assembly back in 2020, together with a full inventory of items that the Ministry of Justice carried out at the time. Peter, throughout my time as Attorney General, I have never misled the public about anything. And I have had numerous press conferences. I have been the most accessible minister at the time. And I have never also shied away from confronting difficult situations. And people should expect the same today. But also during this period, I have tried my best to treat everyone fairly, even the most notorious killers in our society. And all I ask is to be fairly treated as well. At least don't rush to judgment based on one incomplete side of the story. I have done nothing wrong in all the 3.5 years of my tenure as minister. And I'm sure that when I tell my side of the story, you will see that I have suffered great injustice in the court of public opinion. But I know that the majority of Gambians listening to me today are decent people who will see where the truth lies and where falsehood lies. And perhaps to wrap up in this introduction, I would say this. I had served my country to the best of my ability, and I couldn't have been more grateful for that unique opportunity, which I will always cherish. It has been a privilege to serve the Gambian people. I also know that in the course of my service to the nation, I have made difficult decisions that didn't please some sections of our society. And now, I am being personally blamed. Yes, I have been the face of many of these decisions. But it doesn't mean that I did so in my personal capacity. And to now attribute these actions to me alone as if I made personal choices is unfair and is wrong. This is what I wanted to say as an introduction following your first question, Peter.
Okay. It's an opportunity, as I said, for you to tell us what is misleading in the report and for people to know that, as you claim, you've done nothing wrong while acting as Attorney General and Minister of Justice of the Gambia.
Okay. Now, to start with, I think Mustafa could have had a more informed story. With respect in the face of many of these decisions. But it doesn't mean that I did so in my personal capacity. And to now attribute these actions to me alone as if I made personal choices is unfair and is wrong. This is what I wanted to say as an introduction following your first question, Peter.
Okay. It's an opportunity, as I said, for you to tell us what is misleading in the report and for people to know that, as you claim, you've done nothing wrong while acting as Attorney General and Minister of Justice of the Gambia.
Okay. Now, to start with, I think Mustafa could have had a more informed story. With respect,
do bear with us.
Okay, excellent. Now, I was just saying that in all honesty, Mustafa could have had a more informed story with respect to my part of the report if he had done a little more research into my responses. He failed to do this, and now what we see is the consequence of that failure. In all honesty, it appeared to me, at least from my vantage point, that Mustafa already had a preconceived notion about the facts and went ahead to publish his report. The report was simply unfair to me, and this was regrettable. But the whole premise, really, of Mustafa's judicial process is the judicial process. Mustafa makes the allegation that I basically manipulated a court decision in order to unfreeze the TDA lands to benefit someone who was close to me. Now, the first thing I would say to that is that was not true. I did not seek the unfreezing of the TDA lands based on my personal decision, and neither was it for the purposes of benefiting someone close to me. Back in 2017, I have to provide this context here for your audience. Back in 2017, following the change, we all remember the euphoria in the country, the feeling of freedom and openness, and of course the interest that was shown by outsiders in our country. And one of the entities that showed great interest in the Gambia at the time was FTI, Future Touristic. I don't know what the I means, but FTI was a tourist. They're actually the fourth largest tour operators in Europe. You will remember FTI, Peter. They were in the Gambia, I think sometime in the 90s. They were heavily invested in the tourism sector. They were even sponsoring Steve Biko, if I recall very well, the football team.
That is correct.
They were very involved in the Gambia. So some of the investors who wanted to come and invest in the Gambia at that time included FTI. And so, but when FTI was coming at that time, we had already frozen these assets in May. And we didn't freeze the assets under the Companies Act. That's an also very important distinction. We froze the assets under the Anti-Money Laundering Act. And what that act does is to allow the state to temporarily freeze the assets of a suspect while investigations are ongoing, so that the suspect will not dissipate their assets before the conclusion of the investigations. But anyway, I'll come back to that in a bit. So FTI, together with other investors, were flooding the country, but the government was particularly interested to attract FTI. But the other also principal reason why the government was interested in the TDA lands was the impending OIC summit. The government was looking for an ideal location to build the infrastructure for the OIC summit that was impending. So by the time FTI came, we had frozen these TDA lands. So when FTI came, the government assured FTI, and I have attended a few of those meetings Some were held even in the office of the president, with a number of ministers whose ministries had a say in that matter. So I attended some of them, and FTI clearly expressed its willingness to build a 5-star hotel in the country, and the government was interested in the potential job creation opportunities that come with building that kind of hotel. And there were other investors as well. Some were Spanish, etc., etc. But we were mostly occupied with two entities, or rather two objectives: invite FTI back into the country, and also identify an appropriate location for the OIC infrastructure. Now, you will recall also that when the Janneh Commission was established, their initial mandate was for 3 months.
Yes.
It was for 3 months from the date that they were to operate. So the government assured the FTI that the commission proceedings will not take long. It's 3 months, and that we encourage them to keep their interest in the country until the commission wraps up. Unfortunately, those 3 months became 6 months, they became 9 months, they became 1 year, they became 1 year and 3 months, they became 1 year and 6 months. So it went on and on and on. And the FTI was beginning to basically give up, because at that time they had already gone around the TDA area and identified a potential location for the construction of this 5-star hotel. Unfortunately, the location that they identified fell within the TDA Janneh lands that was frozen by the High Court on the request, on the application of the government through the Justice Ministry. So this prolonged period of the Janneh Commission really started to frustrate FTI and the government as well in general, because all the other investors had to now sit and wait until the Janneh Commission proceedings ended. Then we decided in cabinet, it was a cabinet decision, that look, instead of waiting for the Janneh Commission, we've been waiting for a year now and nothing is happening in terms of their conclusion. Why don't we seek to isolate the TDA lands, which are government lands? They're not private properties that former President Jammeh bought. These were not. These were government lands in the tourism development area that was allocated to President Jammeh. Now, the government identified these TDA lands and instructed me as Attorney General to seek the unfreezing of the TDA lands on the basis of the reasons that I have just given to you, that there were potential investors that needed to be given land to invest, and also the OIC, etc.
Just before you continue,
now, when we
just before you continue, so it's land in the TDA allocated to Yahya Jammeh. Is that legal or illegal?
Is what legal? The lands that were allocated to Yahya Jammeh.
In the TDA, were they legally allocated or illegally allocated?
They were unlawfully allocated.
Okay, all right.